The frost came in overnight and left the village looking like something pressed under glass. The rooftops held their white an hour past sunrise, and the lane that ran between the mill and the church smelled of ice and old straw, and the faint sweetness of something rotting slow beneath the cold. Somewhere a rook called once, high and flat, and then was quiet. Norah Fenwick was already up. She was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she stepped out of it. Not plain exactly, but not the sort of face a man would carry home in his memory. Her hands were her most noted feature, and not admiringly. They were red at the knuckle, and capable in ways that had no elegance. She was 25, and the last of her family in Aldwick, her father 3 years in the churchyard. Her mother 5 years before that, and the only inheritance either of them had left her was the knowledge of where the damp came in, and how to keep a fire from eating coal too fast. She had a position as ledger-keeper at the merchant house of Holt and Webb on the Market Street, which was a respectable enough thing, and she walked there 6 mornings a week, and came home in the dark, and did not complain of it to anyone. She was a woman who would not be changed by this winter. Or so she believed, that morning, pulling on her second pair of stockings over the first, listening to the wind find the gap under the kitchen door. She did not know yet what the day would ask of her. Subscribe to the channel and stay for every story. The thing that changed it was not a grand occasion. It began with a child in the lane. He was perhaps 7 years old, or stunted and looking younger, crouched at the base of the millstone wall where the frost had kept the mud hard. And he had one boot on, and one boot gone, and he was not crying. That was the thing Norah noticed first. Not the boot, or the cold, or the cut on his bare foot where the ice had found the skin. He was not crying. He was sitting very still in the way that children sit when they have learned that crying does not bring anyone. He belonged to the bachelor family 3 streets east. She knew him by his red hair and the particular shape of his ears, which were his father's ears, and his father was Thomas Batchelor, who owed rent to Aldwick Hall, and 3 months of debts to the chandler besides, and who was at this particular moment, she had heard, being held by the constable pending the review of a magistrate. She stopped. She had 6 shillings in her coat pocket, and a letter to post, and a full day of ledgers waiting for her at the offices of Holt and Webb, and she was already late enough that Mr. Holt would have occasion to look at his watch if she was any later. She sat down on the wall beside the boy. His name was Edmund. She did not ask it. She remembered it. She said, quietly, that she was going to take off her outer stocking and wrap his foot in it, and that it would not be a perfect solution, but it would be better than the ice, and Edmund looked at her with the blank, fearless curiosity of a child who has stopped expecting much from anyone, and said nothing. She did it. The stocking was wool, worn thin at the heel, but intact. She tied it with a strip from her coat lining, which she cut with her little sewing scissors, because she was a woman who carried sewing scissors, and then she sat with him until the colour came back into his foot enough that she thought it safe for him to move. She had 4 shillings left. She gave him 3. She told him to go to Mrs. Potts at the bread shop on the corner. That Mrs. Potts would know what to do, that he should say Norah Fenwick had sent him. She did not tell him it would be all right, because she was not certain it would be. She helped him up, and he walked carefully on the wrapped foot, and she watched him go around the corner before she picked up her satchel and walked on toward the offices. She did not look back. She did not know then that she had been watched. The man standing in the yard of the Aldwick Arms across the lane had arrived the night before under the name Mr. Calder. which was not his name. He had grey-green eyes, and a face that had been broken once at the nose, and not perfectly repaired, and he was 31 years old, and had not slept well in longer than he could clearly recall. He had come to Aldwych for reasons that were his own business, and that concerned, among other things, the question of a man named Thomas Batchelor and a debt, and what the constable should do with both, and he had not expected to be standing in a cold yard, watching a woman in a good coat that was slightly too large for her give away her own stocking, and 3 shillings to a boy she clearly did not know well, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, as if it cost her nothing. He watched her walk away. He stood there for some time after she had gone. His name was not Calder. It was Ashton. Specifically, it was Rowan Charles Emmett Ashton, the 9th Duke of Morath, and he had ridden into Aldwych the previous evening with his man Fetch, and he had told Fetch that under no circumstances was his rank to be given, because the work he had come to do was better done quietly, and Fetch, who had known him for 11 years and kept every secret he had ever been given, had agreed. The Duke of Meath stood in the yard of the Aldwych Arms and looked at the corner where the woman had gone. He went inside. He said to Fetch, who was eating breakfast by the kitchen fire, "Find out who she is." The offices of Holt and Webb smelled of beeswax and old paper, and the faint chemical sharpness of the ink Mr. Webb ordered in from London, at an expense he never stopped mentioning. Norah arrived 12 minutes past the hour, which was not badly late for the frost, and Mr. Holt said nothing, which she counted a kindness. She spent the morning on the quarterly reconciliation for the Aldwych Hall account. This was where her particular competence showed, and she knew it. She was not a woman who made arithmetic errors. She was not a woman who forgot a line. She had been keeping these books for 3 years, since Mr. Hammond, the previous ledger-keeper, had lost the use of his right hand to a chill in the joints. And she knew these accounts the way she knew the gap under her kitchen door. She knew where the money moved and where it slowed. She knew which creditors were patient and which were not. She knew, in particular, that there was a question about the legal ownership of the entailment document for Aldwych Hall that had been sitting in a drawer at the offices for 7 months, and that the question mattered more than anyone had yet bothered to say aloud. She wrote a note about it in the margin of her daily summary. She did not know who owned the estate properly. That was not her business. Her business was the numbers, and the numbers told her what they told her. At midday the bell above the door rang, and a man came in. He was not especially tall, but he carried himself as if he had never needed to be. His coat was a gentleman's coat, brown and plain, not fashionable, and his hat he removed when he crossed the threshold, which spoke for him before he spoke at all. He had a broken nose and tired eyes that moved around the room in a way that missed nothing. She noticed his hands before she noticed the rest of him. They were still. People who were anxious had hands that did small, unnecessary things. His did not. He said he was looking for the offices of Holt and Webb on behalf of a private party and had been directed here from the market. Mr. Holt came out from the inner room, and there was a brief consultation, and the man who called himself Calder was shown in. Norah went back to the reconciliation. She did not look up again. She had a principle about not looking at people who had not spoken to her. It was a self-protective habit, developed over years of being looked at the way good-looking men tended to look past her. She had found it was easier not to begin. The consultation lasted 40 minutes. When it was over, Mr. Holt came out looking as if he had received news he was not sure how to classify. The man called Calder came out looking exactly the same as when he had gone in. He stopped at her desk. She looked up. "You are the ledger keeper," he said. "I am. The Aldwych Hall account." He did not phrase it as a question. "You have managed it how long?" 3 years. He looked at her for a moment in a way that was not rude and not quite courtly. It was measuring. She was accustomed to being measured and usually found wanting, and she did not flinch from it. "There is a discrepancy," she said. "In the entailment documentation. I have noted it." "I know," he said. She waited. "I will need someone to explain it to the other parties," he said, "when they come. The creditors come Friday." "That is not my position," she said. "I keep the books. I do not attend creditor meetings. I will speak to Mr. Holt." She looked back at her work. "You may speak to Mr. Holt," he went. She heard the bell over the door and then silence, and the scratch of her own pen, and the fire settling in the grate. She thought, "He is not what he says he is." She thought, "It is not my business what he is." She went back to the reconciliation. 2 mornings later, Mr. Holt told her she was to attend the creditor meeting on Friday. He explained this without apology, and without, she noticed, explaining exactly who had insisted on it. He said only that the party of the Duke of Morath had requested a knowledgeable representative of the office to be present. She said, "The Duke of Morath is involved in the Aldwych Hall matter?" Mr. Holt said that appeared to be the case. She said nothing else about it. On Thursday she stayed late to prepare a clean summary of the account's history, going back to the original entailment. She worked by lamplight until nearly 9, and her hands were cold because she was careful with the coal, and when she finally set down the last page she sat for a moment in the quiet and looked at what she had found. It was not what anyone had assumed. The legal instrument that had been drawn up when the hall had last changed hands, 14 years prior, had a clause in it that the creditors would not be happy to read. She had found it by not stopping where everyone else had stopped. She had read to the end, the way she always read to the end, because the end was where the thing that mattered usually was. She copied it out in her clearest hand. She went home in the dark and made tea and went to bed. She did not dream. The creditors arrived Friday at 10 with 2 men from the sheriff's office who did not look like they enjoyed the errand but intended to complete it. There were 4 of them, all from London, all well dressed, and they filled the small conference room of the Holt and Webb offices with the particular smell of men who were confident of winning, clean wool and authority, and a little cold. Norah sat at the far end of the table with her summary in front of her, and her hands folded on top of it. The man called Calder was not there. This surprised her, briefly. She put the surprise away. The creditor's advocate, a Mr. Fenwick of no relation whose name she found irritating, purely on principle, laid out the matter in clean legal sentences. The debt against Aldwych Hall. The terms of the mortgage. The agreement of 6 months past by which the current occupant, one Colonel Rowe, on behalf of the Rowe family, had accepted the terms and failed to meet them. The sheriff's men were here to begin the inventory. The hall would be seized by end of day. He looked at her when he finished. "I understand you have the accounts," he said. "I do. Then you will confirm the figures." "I will confirm the figures," she said. "And I will add one point of information, which you may find relevant." He paused. He had the particular stillness of a man who did not expect women to add points of information. She set the copied clause on the table. She explained it in plain language, without apology and without theatre. The original entailment instrument which governed the conditions under which Aldwych Hall could be legally seized, contained a clause that was unusual and had not been noted in any of the subsequent conveyances. The clause stipulated that in the event of debt proceedings, the first right of assumption lay not with the creditors, but with the original granting party's descendant line. Provided that party could demonstrate a legal claim and produce it within 60 days of the debt notice. The debt notice had been issued 43 days ago. There was a silence. Miss Fenwick, of no relation, said, "And is there such a claimant?" The door opened. The man who had called himself Calder came in. He was not wearing the plain brown coat. He was dressed as what he was, and his man Fetch walked behind him carrying a leather case. And Norah knew immediately what was in the case, because she had known, reading the clause, that someone had sent her to find it, even if they had not told her that was what she was doing. He looked at her when he came in. She looked at him. He sat down across from the creditor's advocate and said, with the flat economy of a man who has never needed volume, "My name is Rowan Ashton. I am the 9th Duke of Merath. My grandmother was the daughter of the original entailing party, which makes the claim set out in that instrument mine. I have the documentation. The 60 days have not elapsed. You will not be seizing this hall today." The silence this time was of a different kind. The creditor's advocate looked at the clause. He looked at the Duke. He looked at the documentation Fetch placed before him. He looked at Norah. She said nothing. She had nothing to add. She folded her hands and waited. It took 2 hours. At the end of it, the sheriff's men went home, and the creditor's advocate sat very still with his papers, and the Duke of Merath thanked Mr. Holt, who was pink with confused pleasure, and then he came to where Norah was gathering her summary. "How long did you know?" he said. "Since Thursday night. And you said nothing to me." "You did not ask me," she said. "And you were not here when the meeting began, which I noticed." He looked at her. Something moved in his grey-green eyes that was not quite a smile, but was in the family of one. "I wanted to be certain," he said, "that you would say it without me in the room." She held her summary against her chest and looked at him plainly. "And now you are," she said. "Yes, then I will go back to the ledgers." She left. She walked back to her desk and sat down and picked up her pen and did not, for some time, write anything. The weeks that followed had a strange quality she did not name. The Duke of Merath remained in Aldwych. He gave no formal reason, and the village speculated freely, and Norah did not speculate because she had work to do. He walked past the offices twice in the first week. On Thursday he came in with a question about the historical accounts that was a reasonable question, though she noticed it was not a question he could not have answered by reading the documents himself. He had sharp eyes and a very serious face, and he asked her questions as if her answers were the things he had come for. She was not accustomed to this. She answered him plainly. On the second Thursday, he said, the boy, Edmund Batchelor. His father is released. She looked up. The charges were reviewed, he said, and found insufficient. By whom? By the reviewing magistrate. She held his gaze for a moment. And the debt to the chandler? Settled, he said. Anonymously, the chandler received the full sum by note. That was not the constable's office. No. She looked back at her work. Her hands were very steady. You should know, he said, that the boy's boot was also replaced. Both boots. The family was informed there had been an error in the accounting. She did not answer that. He sat very still. "Thank you," she said finally to the page. "Thank you," he said, to something she was not looking at. She thought about that for a long time after he left. She was not a woman who built things out of small gestures. She had a practical understanding of her own position, her own face, her own coat, and what men of his kind generally found and did not find in women like her. She had made her peace with her life, which was a competent life, and she was not in the habit of dismantling peace for the sake of something that had no foundation. She held to this. She held to it for exactly 9 days. On the 9th day she came in from lunch and found a woman she did not know sitting in the wooden chair beside her desk. The woman was perhaps 60, with the composed face of someone who had carried heavy things for a long time and found a position for them. She wore a housekeeper's keys at her waist, and she had brown eyes and dry humour in the set of her mouth, and she introduced herself as Mrs. Aldby. "I keep the house for the Duke of Merath," she said, "at Merath Park." "I see. He has asked me to come." "Why, Mrs.?" Aldby looked at her with the particular patience of someone who has learned not to say the obvious thing to people who are not ready to hear it. "He would like you to know," she said, "the ledger at Merath Park requires attention. There is no one currently who manages it with sufficient precision. He would like to offer you the position." Norah said, "That is a considerable distance from Aldwick." "It is, and it would remove me from my current position." "It would, and this is a professional inquiry." Mrs. Aldby looked at her hands and then back at her face, and there was something in the old woman's eyes that was not unkind. "Miss Fenwick," she said, "I have known Rowan Ashton since he was 8 years old. I knew his father, and I knew his mother, and I knew the woman he was engaged to before, who had a pretty face and was cruel to the bootboy when she thought no one was watching, and I knew him the morning after he ended it, which was the worst morning I have witnessed in that house. I am not here about a ledger." Norah was quiet for a long time. "He sent you," she said. "He asked me to come. He would have come himself, but he was not certain of his welcome." "He was not wrong to be uncertain. No, Mrs. Aldby said. "He was not. He is a man who has been wrong before, and knows it, and he would rather be cautious than wrong again. He asked me to say only that if you wish to know more, he will be at the Aldwick Arms this evening, and that if you do not come, he will understand it, and he will not come again." She rose and smoothed her coat. "He is not always easy," she said, "but he has never in 31 years been cruel to anyone who could not answer back. I will say no more than that." She left. Norah sat at her desk and looked at the empty chair and the space where the woman had been. She thought, this is where a sensible person weighs the facts. The facts were these. She was 25 and had a position and a roof and 4 shillings in her coat pocket on any given morning. She had not asked for anything other than what she had, and had not expected it. He was a duke, and she kept ledgers. He had deceived her about his name and his purpose from the first moment, and she had not known, and she did not like not knowing. He had also paid the chandler, both boots, and the arrears of a family she had mentioned to no one by name, and that she had spent exactly 3 shillings on, which was the full extent of her obligation. She did not know how he had found out about Edmund. She thought she knew. She thought he had been watching. She thought he had been watching since before she sat down on the wall, and she did not know yet whether that made it better or worse. She went home. She changed her dress. She went to the Aldwick Arms. He was in the small room at the back, not the public room, which she was glad of, because she did not want an audience for this. The fire was lit. There was tea and bread and a lamp and 2 chairs, and he was standing when she came in, and he did not look surprised to see her, but he looked as if he had not been certain. He said, "Sit down, please." She sat. He did not immediately sit. He stood by the fire and looked at her. "My name," he said, "is not Calder. I have not used Calder in any way that was meant to deceive you about the work, but it deceived you, and I am sorry for it. I came to Oldwick because of the entailment question, and I used a false name because I did not want the creditors to know the claimant was here before the meeting. That is the practical reason. It does not cover everything." She said nothing. "I was standing in the yard of the Arms when you sat down beside the bachelor boy," he said. "I was watching the lane because I had come out at first light, and I was restless, and I saw what you did. I did not announce myself. I should have announced myself. I did not, because I wanted to see what you would do when you finished." He stopped. "You did not look back," he said. "You walked away. He was warm," she said. "There was nothing more I could do." "No, but you could have looked back, and you did not, because looking back would have been for yourself, not for him." She looked at the fire. "You were the reviewing magistrate," she said. "I was. And the chandler. Yes, and the boots." Yes, she was quiet for a long moment. "You should have told me," she said. "At any point after the creditor meeting, you should have told me." "I know. I do not like having a part of the story withheld from me. I do not do my best thinking when I do not have all the information. I know that too. It made me feel foolish," she said, "when I understood. I am not accustomed to feeling foolish." He said, very quietly, "I imagine not. I imagine it is a rare event." She looked at him. His face was serious, and his hands were at his sides, and he had the look of a man who was telling the truth and finding it cost him something, and was paying it anyway. "I wanted," he said, "to see who you were, when you did not know I was watching. It is the only way I know how to know someone, what you do when no one of consequence can see you, when there is nothing to gain from it. You sat down in the frost and gave a child your stocking and 3 shillings, and you did not look back, and I have not stopped thinking about it since." He picked up his coat from the back of the chair and then set it down again. "I am not asking you for anything tonight," he said. "I would not ask tonight, because tonight is too close to everything I have just told you, and a yes given too close to a confession is not worth what it costs you. I am asking only that you know why I came, and why I stayed, and that when you have had time to think, if you wish to speak again, you know where I am." He turned toward the door. She said, "How much time?" He stopped. "How much time?" she said again. "Are you proposing to give me?" He turned back. Something moved in his face. She thought it might be what a smile looked like on a face that had forgotten the mechanics. "A month," he said. "If you have not come to find me in a month, I will understand it, and I will go. And if I come in a fortnight—" He was very still. "Then I will be very glad," he said, "that it was a fortnight." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Sit down." He sat. She poured the tea. They sat by the fire for an hour and a half, and the conversation was plain and long, and wandered into the entailment question, and then into the matter of bridge maintenance, about which she had opinions, and then into the question of what he was going to do about the Oldwick Hall situation, now that he had stopped the seizure, which he had not entirely decided. She told him what the books suggested, which was 3 things. He listened to all 3 and asked questions. She told him her opinions plainly, without softening them, and he did not flinch from them, which was the thing she noticed most. Before she left, she said, "The woman you were engaged to before." He did not change expression, but his hands stopped moving. Yes, Mrs. Aldby told me there had been someone. There was. She said she was unkind to the servants. She was, and you ended it for that, among reasons. But yes, for that. Norah nodded. I would like, she said, standing pulling on her coat, to be spoken to plainly. I am not a person who enjoys inference or suggestion. If you mean something, I would prefer you say it. I mean, he said, that I would like to know you better. I mean that I have not wished to know someone better in a long time. I mean that I will not push you, and I will not press you, and if at the end of the month you find you cannot see a way to it, your no will not change anything I owe you, which is an apology and a good deal of gratitude. She pulled on her gloves. Left hand first, then right. Fortnight, she said. She left. She came back in 9 days. It was not a dramatic return. She arrived at the Aldwych Arms at the same time in the evening and asked for the small room, which Mrs. Kells, the innkeeper, gave her without comment and perhaps with the faintest shade of approval. He arrived 12 minutes later, which she suspected was because he had not been far. He sat down across from her. She said, I have a condition. Tell me. If you are ever withholding something from me again for any reason, I would like to be told that you are withholding it, even if you cannot tell me what it is. I do not need all the information at all times. I need to know when I am missing some. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. And I keep my position, she said, or one like it. I am not willing to be without work. I do not do well without work, I know. And you have not been entirely honest about a number of things, and I am not fully over that, and I would like you to understand that it will take time. I know that too. Good, she said. She folded her hands on the table. Those are my terms. He said, I accept them. Then yes, she said. It was the only word she had used all evening for that particular question, and it was enough. He did not reach for her. He sat very still, and the fire made a small sound, and the rook outside called once, and then nothing. Then he very carefully removed his right glove, finger by finger, and he turned his hand over on the table, palm up, and left it there. She looked at it. She removed her own right glove, finger by finger. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, and they were warm, and she had not known until that moment how cold her hands had been all winter. The wedding was small by any honest measure, and enormous by the measure of what a duke's small wedding still involves, a church with a borrowed window and a November sun that found it exactly at the right moment, and a breakfast at Mereth Park afterward that Mrs. Aldby had organised with the contained fury of someone who had been waiting years for an occasion worthy of her abilities. Norah wore grey silk and her mother's ring on her right hand and nothing borrowed, because she did not have the kind of friends from whom you borrowed things, though she found afterward that she did. 1 year later, there was frost on the Mereth Park windows that looked very like the frost on the Aldwych Lane, the morning this had all begun. The fire was good. The room smelled of wood smoke and beeswax, and the faint lavender that Mrs. Aldby put in the linen cupboard, which Norah had decided she loved. Edmund Batchelor, who was 8 now, and enrolled at the village school 3 miles east, which was funded by an anonymous endowment that no one in the county had managed to identify the source of, had sent a drawing of a horse. It was not an accurate horse, but it was a cheerful one, and it was on the mantelpiece. In Bath, a young woman named Helena Rowe, who was a cousin of the Rowe family that had nearly lost Aldwych Hall, and who had, at the engagement dinner the winter before, said in Norah's hearing that she supposed some men had eccentric taste, and at least the new Duchess would know how to count the silverware, was spending a quiet season away from London, on an allowance that did not extend to the parties she had enjoyed previously. She had written a letter to the Duke in October that he had not opened. Mr. Holt had hired 2 new clerks and a second ledger keeper, because Norah had spent 6 months training them before she left, and he had told her at the wedding that he had always thought her worth more than he had paid her, and she had said, "Yes, you did underpay me," and he had laughed, surprised, and that had been fine. Thomas Batchelor had his rent paid through spring. The mare in the south stable, who had come in lame in July and was healed now, came to the fence when Norah walked past and put her heavy head on Norah's shoulder, the way she had since August, the way she apparently intended to keep doing. Rowan Ashton, 9th Duke of Merath, was sitting in the chair by the fire, with the Bridge Survey open across his knee. And he was not reading it. He was watching his wife stand by the window in the early morning light, with her bare hands wrapped around a cup of tea. And he was thinking that he had driven 11 miles to Aldwick on a wet November morning, looking for a legal document. And he had come home with something else entirely. She had not looked back. She had given the boy her stocking, and 3 shillings, and she had not looked back. He had, he thought, been looking ever since. She turned from the window and looked at him. "You are staring," she said. "I am." "At what?" "At you." She came and sat across from him, and she picked up his bare hand and held it in both of her own, the way she did in the mornings, and the fire was warm, and outside the rook called once. Their hands did not let go. What you are when no one is watching is the only self that is entirely yours. Everything else you may borrow or perform, or let the occasion ask of you. But the moment in the frost, when the boy is cold, and you are late, and no one of consequence can see you, that is the moment that tells. Choose carefully, in that moment. The rest of your life begins there. If this story held you, if you felt the frost in that lane and the warmth of that fire, subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next. Tell me in the comments. When Norah sat down beside Edmund in that lane, knowing she was already late, knowing she had only 6 shillings, what would you have done? I read every answer. There is another story waiting for you here, and I will see you in it.